Thanks for joining us on Health Vision. I'm Jackie Wolf, Associate Professor of Social Medicine at Ohio University. Bullying has plagued the nation's schools for years and has recently taken new forms. Today, children are bullied not only on the playground and in the classroom, but also via the internet and text messaging. Christine Bhat, Assistant Professor of Counseling and Higher Education at the Ohio University College of Education, is here with us today to talk about bullying and what we can do about it. It's so nice to have you here today, Christine.
Thank you for having me here, Jackie.
You know, I think most of our viewers think they know what bullying is, but I'd like to start with a definition. How do you, as someone who has researched bullying, define bullying?
There are three components that identify whether a behavior is bullying behavior or not. Number one, harm should be done. The second point is that there should be a repetition of the behavior, so a one-time act of aggression isn't considered bullying. And finally, there should be a power imbalance, as in the bully has more power over the victim or the target.
And when you say harm should be done, I mean, we're talking, I assume you mean harm as very broadly defined.
Yes.
Because you're not necessarily talking physical harm.
It could be physical harm in the case of physical bullying, but there's also indirect bullying, which could take place through verbal means or innuendo. And so harm in this sense could be psychological harm or social harm. Bullying also can take place through exclusion, by excluding young people from activities that their peers are engaged in.
Which can be some of the most harmful of bullying, too, because that really, I mean, talk about persistent and scarring. That's really hurtful to kids.
At an age where peer acceptance is probably the number one consideration, to be excluded from what your peers are doing or talking about can be very hurtful.
Do we see similar characteristics in bullies as opposed to victims? Let's start with bullies first. What kind of common characteristics do we see in the child who tends to be a bully?
Well, certainly there is a quest for power. Often bullies are able to engage other people or incorporate other people into their bullying activities. So, you know, it's very rare that a bully runs alone. They usually have a supporting chorus who lend them support in their activities.
And they can be very intimidating to other children too, so that other children don't even want to, they're so afraid that they'll be the bullies if they even try to intervene, that they really do have power over a lot of different children.
Yes, that's a really interesting point you make, because most researchers who've looked at bullying identify the bullies, the victims or the targets, and the bystanders as three component groups. And there has been a lot of research that has actually indicated that being a bystander of bullying is as harmful in some cases as being a victim, because years after the experience, people still reflect back on the fact that they watched something hurtful being done and did nothing to address it.
That's such an interesting point to make. Do you know, when I was doing some research for this show, I remembered a child in 5th grade who was bullied, not by another child, but by the teacher.
Right.
And I actually tried to look him up on the internet because of the guilt that I felt, even though I was only 10 and this was a teacher who really was doing the persistent bullying of this one child in the class. And I still feel overwhelming guilt. And it's been decades and decades since this happened.
Yes, and you know, when you talk with adults about bullying, you will often find that they share experiences similar to yours, you know, where you remember these experiences and you remember the sense of powerlessness and helplessness that you felt, and the sense of guilt that you did nothing.
In fact, for me, it was a real defining moment, because I speak up now, always, and I think it's because of that helpless feeling that I felt when I was 10 years old. So you talked about the defining characteristics of a bully. Tell us about the defining characteristics of the victim.
Well, often the victim is perceived by himself or herself and by others as being in a weaker position for whatever reason, whether that's physically weaker or socially not as accepted by his or her peers and so on. Victims or targets, because of their experiences of bullying, tend to be nervous, have difficulties in concentrating on their work, often engage in avoidant types of behaviors because they're so afraid to engage with people due to the bullying experiences.
Some parents might be looking for signs that either their children are being bullies or being bullied. What can you tell parents about what to look for in how their children might be behaving if they're worried, say if their child is a victim? What kind of things should they look for?
I think the number one thing to look for is a change of customary behavior. So, you know, noticing a marked change in your child's mood, the fact that your child might come back from school looking very dejected, not be willing to talk about what's going on at school, express a desire not to go to school or engage in truancy. All these sorts of behaviors, avoidant type behaviors, are often an indication that something is going wrong at school, and that something could be bullying.
What are schools doing to kind of preempt bullying? Are there programs in place? Because this is in the news a lot lately, and especially with school shootings, and hearing that school shooters almost always have been relentlessly bullied throughout their school years. So what kind of programs are there in place, or what do educators like you, what have you been doing with school systems to try to preempt bullying?
All right, well, let me say that for the past 10 years, this has been the focus of much of the work that counseling professionals and other professionals have focused on in the schools. The idea of preventing and doing large group interventions to educate people about what is bullying, and to educate, for instance, bystanders about the fact that they do have the power to intervene, and to provide them with ideas of how they might be able to intervene. Interestingly, Ohio passed, I think it's House Bill 276, which actually stipulates that all departments of education must have a policy addressing bullying and harassment in the schools.
Really?
And that's a really positive development.
Now, is Ohio unique in that sense, or have other states done it?
There are other states who are doing this, but this is a relatively recent development. And actually it was, I think, I'm not exactly sure of the date, but I believe it was December 31st, 2007, which marked the cutoff date for schools to implement a bullying policy, an anti-harassment and bullying policy. And the Ohio Department of Education has actually published a model policy to guide school districts about what they should implement in this anti-bullying and harassment policy, which is, you know, very helpful for schools wanting to implement.
So very specifically, what are schools doing? When you talk about a anti-bullying program, give us an example of what that might be.
Well, one of the things is to make very clear to students what sorts of behaviors constitute bullying, and then secondly, to have students understand what the disciplinary or you know, the consequences are to engaging in those types of bullying behaviors. It also specifically addresses cyberbullying, or bullying that takes place through the internet or cell phones.